Jewish Agnostics. With us today, we have Noam Weissman, the Executive Vice President of OpenDor Media and the founder of the most popular Jewish podcast, Unpacked. So do you want to give a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so the podcast is called Unpacking Israeli History, and we have a YouTube channel called Unpacked that has 220,000 subscribers, 40 to 50 million views. Unpacking Israeli History, the podcast, just crossed 1 million downloads, where everyone wants to learn the history of Israel. So it's quite remarkable. Obviously, since 10/7, things have changed. Before this, I've been doing this for 5-6 years. Before this, I was the principal of a high school. But I was always interested in the big questions in life, and always trying to influence and educate, really, people who are interested in being educated. People are interested in having a conversation. People are interested in learning. And it sounds like Oz and Stephen, you two would be certainly included in that description.
Yeah, so we gave a little bit of introduction in terms of numbers, about what the channel means and how the channel and Unpacked plays a role in Israel advocacy. But to you specifically, what does Unpacked mean?
Well, to me specifically, Unpacked is, I would say, in some ways very countercultural, because you use the term advocacy, but that's not what we're trying to do. We're actually trying to be an educational organization, which is different than advocacy. Advocacy says, I have the truth about everything. And you see this right now on TikTok. You see this right now on YouTube. You see this right now on so many platforms where people claim to be educators, but what they're really doing is there to tell you what the truth is and make sure that I have the truth. And my job is to bring you to the truth. Human beings are much more complicated than that. Human beings are much more complex than that. And the truth is much more complicated than that. And the truth is much more complex than that. You have to look at the history. You have to look at the context. You have to look at many different sides of an issue. And when you do that, then you're able to really understand what's going on. And so what Unpacked is trying to do is it's trying to say, yes, there are some things in the world that are first principles. Absolutely. One of those first principles is that Judaism has contributed a lot to the world. We believe that. We believe very fundamentally that Zionism is a good thing. It is absolutely a good for the world, and it is good for the Jewish people. We believe that. We can unpack that a bit more. But from those sort of fundamentals, we say, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to be Zionist? What does it mean to be Jewish? What does it mean to understand the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? And what we really care about is the subject. The subject is not Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Stephen. That's not what it is. The subject is the person learning. That's the subject. And when you view it differently through that prism, that the subject is the person learning, not the actual content of the subject, then you're able to tailor make your content in a way that's going to really, I think, excite people and animate them and get them thinking, and not treat them like automatons, but treat them like human beings who want to understand more, who want to explore more. So that's why I think what Unpacked is doing is really, really important. And by the way, not just direct to consumer. Yes, big YouTube channel. We have 2 other YouTube channels that we've launched today, Unpacked and Big Jewish Ideas as well. And we have multiple different podcasts, TikTok and Instagram. But we also work with thousands of educational institutions that we want to make sure that educators at private schools, at public schools, at Jewish schools, at youth groups, at trip providers, that they have the curriculum and lesson plans that they need in order to make sure that what people are getting is not simply, here's what to think about things, but here are the tools for how to think about things.
Right. And when you talk about this difference in conflict, so when we refer to conflict, we talked about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But when you talk about conflict, you talk about the conflict with the student. Does that mean the conflict within the student as the student learning what is the conflict that the student has in learning? Is it between themselves, and how is it between themselves?
Well, I don't know, Stephen. What do you see as the conflict when you're studying? What are the conflicts?
I would say more the conflict of learning, controversial information would be the conflict between something making sense to you but being contrary to traditional or familial beliefs. So, for example, um, something that like we had to as Jews to bear in mind is even though we were most undoubtedly usually I know Judaism doesn't equal Zionism, and we're actually going to explore that later on. But even though I am, for example, pro-Israel, when I see treatment of Palestinians or like when we talk about that, and that's an issue of discussion that's talked about in the Unpacked videos, you also need to heed those points. And I guess like that could be a conflict within yourself as you're learning because you need to both like stay true to your principles, but also acknowledge um, measurements and statistics and facts that are contrary to those, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that that's a really important thing to do. So we have our internal conflicts of how we deal with challenges, whether or not that we have, like you said, we're supposed to think certain things, right? Um, and then there's the conflict of, like you said, the parents. It could be teachers. It could be um, not just parents and teachers. It could be the broader zeitgeist. If one of the things that I wanted to be talking about is, have you both seen the Harris polls? No?
No, I don't
All right, so
believe I
let
have.
me read to you a few
Yeah.
Harris polls, okay? There's something called the Harris poll, and it's about your generation. So you ready for this? It's 18 to 24-year-olds. I don't know if you're 18 or yet, but like 18 to 24-year-olds. And it's about 65 plus. Listen to these statistics, okay? Gents, listen to this. Question that was just asked. In the support, who do you support more in the Israel versus Hamas fight? Americans, okay? If you're over 65 years old, 96% say Israel. Makes sense. And if you're 18 to 24 years old, it's 50-50. 50% of 18 to 24-year-olds support Hamas. And only 4% of if you're over 65 years old. Why do you think that's the case?
Lack of education, lack of like historical understanding, I would say, just because like over 65 were alive at Israel's founding and understand the significance behind it.
I think it's a lot easier for people to hear one side of an issue, especially the very popular underdog story of Hamas, and really latch onto that as a story of good versus evil, with Hamas being good. But it takes a lot more interest. It takes a lot more desire to actually delve into the conflict and understand the history behind it. And I think that lack of desire is the reason, personally.
So I want to get to that, Oz. You think people are you think 18 to 24-year-olds are your generation, let's call it, are just lazy with their information gathering? Is that what's going on here?
I don't think lazy so much as, especially with the rise, because we're the first generation that really has had easy access to places like the internet and social media. I think it's not so much that we're lazy, but more so it's become so easy to trap ourselves in an information bubble that we some people just choose to stay in there, and it's not so much laziness as much as it is a desire to stay within what's comfortable and a desire that if you're hearing the same opinion peddled over and over, you tend to stay within that opinion. And it takes, I think, a strong will to really decide to break out of that.
So I have another stat to throw at you boys. You ready for this one?
Ready?
Yeah.
All right, here we go. I have one more after this. Number one. This is the second stat. Sorry. If you're over 65 years old, the question was asked: should Jews be viewed as oppressors or false, or is this concept of oppressor versus oppressed a false ideology? If you're over 65 years old, only 9% said that Jews are oppressors. If you're between 18 to 24 years old in the United States of America, what percentage of Jews fall into the category of oppressors according to this poll, according to 18 to 24-year-olds? 67%.
Wow,
So 2 and 3 believe that Jews are oppressors.
2 out of 3.
that's crazy.
That's
So what do you do with that? Meaning, like,
How do
you're
we
talking about the
really
conflict that
reach
you're
that
getting from your
point?
parents and your teachers. What I'm wondering about is something else. I'm wondering about what do you do about the conflict in which the zeitgeist, the milieu in which you're living in, is one in which Jewish people are viewed in a certain way.
I guess like that's why you have to turn to education, because that's something that is significantly that's something that impacts the youth. And if that's 18 to 24, I guess it hadn't pulled anyone beforehand for legal reasons, but it'd be interesting to see what 14 to 18-year-olds would think, especially because those are the people on social media. Those are the people most impacted by TikTok and films like that. That would be interesting to me.
I want
Yeah,
to say
well,
it's
18 to
very
24 year
similar.
olds are right there also with TikTok. Right there. Yeah. So, I mean, and I'll give you one last one. One last one. One of the questions that was posed was let me read it to you correctly. Do you think that the long-term answer to the Israel-Palestinian dispute is for Arab states to absorb the Palestinians, for there to be two states, Israel and Palestine, or for Israel to be ended and given to Hamas and the Palestinians? Ready for this one? If you're over 65 years old, 4% said, only 4% said for Israel to be ended and given to Hamas and Palestinians. For Israel to be ended, only 4%, meaning 96% of Americans are like, yeah, all good. If you're over 65 years old, sorry. If you're between 18 to 24 years old, 51% said the solution should be for Israel to be ended and given to Hamas and the Palestinians.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's
I'm sorry, you
crazy.
said
Yeah, it's
51?
crazy. Of course it's crazy. And so that's why I think many people have difficulty having a nuanced conversation about these things, especially if you're Jewish, especially if your identity is so connected to Israel. How could it not be connected to Israel? Every single thing that we do, whether it's in your tefillah classes, your prayer classes in your school, or it's in your Torah classes in which you're studying, it's all connected to Israel. It's all connected to the land of Israel, to the places in Israel. It's all connected. It's all connected to your Jewish brothers and sisters and cousins who are living in Israel. Almost, I don't know what it is, between 40 to 45% of world Jewry lives in Israel. So, of course, it's really hard for people to be able to have this dispassionate understanding of Israeli history and the Israeli story when these are the statistics that exist in the world. It's hard.
Right, right. And that what do you think that means for universities and colleges worldwide, with those percentages impacting university students the most?
Well, it's the trend is going this way, Stephen. Meaning, if you look at the statistics, it's always I could pull it up again. It's 65. It's every single one is like this. So 65 plus. There's broadly speaking more support for Israel than it gets 55 to 64 is the next one, then 45 to 55, then 35 to 44, and then 25 to 34, and then 18 to 24. It's just going the other direction. I don't think the issue is universities and colleges. I think the issue is high schools and middle schools.
Because that's where the education is most vulnerable or
I think that's where
susceptible.
the
Where their
education could
minds are the
happen.
most malleable.
Right,
I think
right.
it's where it could happen the most. When you're 18 years old, you suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect the most. The Dunning-Kruger effect, you got to check this one out. It's unbelievably important. It's when people have a very small amount of competence on an issue. Very often they have an incredible amount of confidence on that very same issue. And the people who suffer the most from the Dunning-Kruger effect are typically 18, 19-year-olds who go into university and they take like some general world class on world civilization, let's say, the history of whatever. They know a little bit about it, and then they become incredibly confident. You hear what I'm saying?
Right, right.
Yeah.
So, like, what the goal is, we got to make sure that we're confident and we're competent, not one or the other.
Right, right. That's an interesting statistic. So it could even, on the Israeli side, the Dunning-Kruger effect can also take root if people 18 to 24 are pro-Israel but don't know why, or aren't able to
Exactly.
defend their
Yeah,
views.
exactly. Stephen, you probably heard me say this before, but I actually strongly encourage people if they don't know. Encourage people if they don't know much about the story of Israel and Israeli history and the story of Zionism and Judaism. Don't get into fights and activism and advocacy about something, like even if you feel so strongly, because typically people on the other side of things, they spend a lot of time seeking to either assert their own identity or seeking to discredit your identity. And so we have to make sure that we know our stuff, that we know our history, that we know that there are different sides of this all. And so I'm a snob for education, guys. I'm a snob for education. I think there are no shortcuts, but there are shortcuts. Shortcuts, as you know, it's the Unpacked videos. You have 7 to 10 minute videos. The Unpacking Israeli History podcast, 40 minutes. You don't have to read all these books behind me, bro. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to do that. But their videos, their podcasts, to make sure that everyone knows the story. And I can't stress enough also the value of going there and seeing it and being in Israel and going to different parts within Israel and getting that story.
Right.
That's certainly. And another thing, while we were talking about that, what I noticed, we were talking about if you don't have any knowledge of Zionism or Israeli history, then don't really get into activism, because really you're just making a fool of yourself, if anything. And I feel like it's very similar to other events that have happened in the past, like the Iraqi war, the Russia-Ukraine war. Everyone has an opinion on both sides, and then you ask, okay, can you point to the place on a map? And you'll have like 50% of them getting it wrong. So I think that's a big problem in society right now, that people always feel entitled to have a voice in a say in something, when in reality, they don't really know much about the issue.
Yeah, I think it's really important that listen, we're human beings. We're allowed to feel things, and we should feel things. But when information presents itself that is not in line with what we think we know or what we think is, then we should have the humility to be able to change our opinion on things. And my hope is that when people understand the following few facts, number one, maybe you'll say is not a fact, and you'll be probably correct. But number one, Israel is imperfect. That's, I believe, a fact. That's an opinion, but yeah, I believe that to be a truism, because I don't think any country in the world is perfect. I think that Israel is a wonderful and flourishing democracy, and I think that there are problems with its expressions of its democracy. Those are things that I think are true. I also think what's equally true is that Hamas is a regime that wants to eradicate the Jewish state and therefore the Jewish people. We've seen what happens when there is no Jewish state. We know what happens when there is no Jewish state. We've seen the 2,000 years of history. And Hamas is an organization that is dedicated to the death of the Jewish people. That's reality. And my hope is that when people understand and they learn the history of Hamas, and they learn the history of how the indoctrination of the youth in the West Bank and in Gaza specifically has led to such unprecedented extremism, people will allow themselves to be humble enough to say, okay, I get it. Israel's an imperfect democracy. The United States is an imperfect democracy. Many countries are imperfect democracies. So you might say United States is a republic. Okay, Mazel tov. Beautiful. But you get the idea, right? And that's okay. But it has a right to exist. It has the will to exist. And let's learn that history. Let's have that broader education. And I think that if you have that, then listen, everyone's entitled to their opinions, but an informed opinion, I think, is the most important right now.
Right. And talking about like the informed opinion, this conflict at large, leads us to like the next question. Given like the significant rise OpenDor Media has seen after this conflict, as you had talked about, because you had talked about like how almost like disheartening yet exciting it is to have this rise of attention come, because it's disheartening the fact that it had to come after such an egregious and horrific conflict, but is exciting because attention is attention regardless. How do you think that open door media will continue to play a role after the conflict? And what steps are you taking actively to ensure that the company retains its reach after the tension from the conflict subsides?
Listen, look at history right now. We have COVID, we have May 2021, we have 10/7. Each of those different moments has led to sparks of interest and curiosity. We've added, I don't know the exact number, but something like 30,000 subscribers since 10/7. We have 4.2 million unique watchers, viewers of our YouTube content, unique educational content since 10/7. We have over 350,000 downloads of Unpacking Israeli since 10/7. But what we've seen is every single time there's been an external moment that influences the world, it influences anyone that's interested in digital media, right? So what would be examples of that? COVID, like I said, COVID. Everyone all of a sudden started saying, you know what you could do? You get your education online. And so we had a massive boost. It went, the hockey stick effect, it's called. It went, going like this and then boom, right? And after May 2021, Sheikh Jarrah and the rockets from Gaza and the social media war that took place, everyone starts searching in what is Hamas. Everyone starts searching in what's the history of Israel. Everyone starts searching in what happened in 1948, what happened in 1967, what's the story of 1973, who are Israelis, who are Jews, who are Zionists. And all of a sudden that leads to it. So when you're able to build on each of these moments, you're already there. That's the key. So you do two different things. One is you're proactive. You make content in advance of any sort of thing happening because you're able to anticipate. So one of the things that we did is we made a video after the war with Hamas in May 2021. We made a video on Hezbollah. Why do we make a video on Hezbollah, terrorists up north, right, in Lebanon? Well, we did that because we knew there would eventually be something going on with Hezbollah. And so we make a video about who is Hezbollah. And then you're able to, when something comes on, or when something is of interest to everyone and piques their curiosity, then all of a sudden the algorithm of YouTube goes like that and it's crazy. So you're proactive. And then we're also reactive. We're able to make content very quickly after huge moments. So you get, it's both of those sort of games that we play on media to make sure that we're constantly proactively thinking and also having the tools to be reactive in the moment. And then with educational institutions, everyone's finding us now, even without proactive marketing, because we are the educational media players in the space.
Right. And do you think, like, aside from being reactive and proactive in terms of information, which is crucial, do you think that, like, if there is kind of silence in terms of history with Israel, and I know that's hard to believe, but more silence relative to what's happening, would that hurt the company and its outreach if there's not really much to be proactive or reactive to?
If you find me a year in world history that there wasn't stuff going on with the Jewish people, I'd be fascinating to find that year. There will always be something going on. And it's not just about Israel. It's also about Judaism. It's also about the story of this religion and this people, because Judaism is both a religion and a people. And we're always going to want to be interesting people in their religion and in their story. Oz and Stephen, we want you guys to know that if you have questions, you're typing in questions, you want to understand something about Judaism, spirituality, you want to understand something about the history of Israel, Jewish history in general, what happened during the Middle Ages, who is Rashi, what is the story of Maimonides, like where are they from, what is this whole thing about, why do they matter? We want to make sure that you get these on YouTube. And people are interested in these stories, not just the story of specific conflicts with Israel. But yes, is it my hope that there aren't conflicts with the Jewish people and conflicts with Israel? Sure. Absolutely. But we're the storytellers of this generation, and we're going to make sure that we tell this story, the Jewish storytellers of this generation, and we're going to make sure to tell that Jewish story, which is always interesting, regardless of the tension or conflicts of that moment.
Right.
So I thought that approach was interesting too, about being proactive, because not only you can boost viewership, but in a way you can also educate the people before the media hits them. For example, with Hezbollah, you could educate them on the terrorist organization before the media does, and in that way, you're sort of counteracting any sort of bias that they might encounter had they only listened to the media beforehand.
That's the idea. That's exactly.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Nailed it.
About Judaism and Zionism in general, because we've been talking a lot about how they interact and where they separate. Do you think that Judaism is inherently linked to Zionism, or is there like some sort of divide between the two?
It's an interesting question because of the way you phrased it. Inherently linked. Well, there was not a political movement called Zionism until the 19th century, which is important to note that was led as a political movement by people who were not necessarily religious and often were anti-religious, actually. And they said, we have to do something fascinating. We have to, in many ways, create a new Jew, which was really interesting. We were going to create a new Jew, a Jew that was no longer going to be submissive, a Jew that was no longer going to be at the whims of, in some ways, God, you might say, in some ways, the local government and Gentiles. And we're going to create a new situation where the new Jew is going to be able to chart a new destiny. So in some ways, when you look at the history of early Zionism, you could say it's an offshoot. But that is a misunderstanding, an incomplete understanding of what Zionism is in fundamental ways. Zionism has become the expression of a healthy Jewish identity. A healthy Jewish identity is an identity that combines a few different aspects: Jewish faith, Jewish peoplehood, Jewish land. All three are connected to each other. All three are connected. So what Zionism is able to do, and what it's always done, and there are multiple different strands of Zionism. Let's make sure that everyone who's listening remembers that not every Zionist looks the same. Not every feature of Zionism is the same. Not every aspect of Judaism is the same. You have Haredi, ultra-Orthodox Jews. You have conservative Jews. You have Sephardic Jews. You have modern Orthodox Jews. You have Reformed Jews. Okay, it's a lot of different things. But broadly speaking, Judaism is the acknowledgement that there is one God, and this one God has given the Jewish people a specific destiny in this world, a destiny that will always be connected to the land of Israel, a destiny that will always make sure and ask and demand that the Jewish people will be there to make the world a better place, what people call tikkun olam, that the Jewish people have a set of commandments to follow as part of this religion, and that the Jewish people are a people who have both a common fate and a common destiny. The common fate, as we all know, is the common fate that we see forged in the fires of places like Auschwitz, and 3,000 years ago, places like Egypt. And it has a common destiny. The destiny is a place like Sinai, where it is in tradition described as there was a great revelation. The Jewish people have this set of principles to behave and to do and to think and to act. So that's what's going on here. Zionism and Judaism are intertwined with each other. A healthy Jewish identity is a Jewish identity that has a Jewish soul and the body. And when you separate the soul from that body, there is lack of clarity. And what happened for almost 2,000 years is the Jewish people lacked this healthy identity. They didn't know what it looked like to form a government. They didn't know what it looked like to have garbage men. They didn't know what it was to be a majority, to have power. But the Jewish people have always been meant to be able to forge their identity and to say, This is what it looks like not to be at the whims of other peoples, of other groups, but to be able to say, this is what it's going to look like. What does Jewish music mean? What does it mean to play sports in a Jewish way? What does it mean to have a society Jewishly, to incorporate other minorities into your experience? So for a long time, the Jewish people, I would say, had phenomenal things about them, but were sickly because it didn't have the connection to that land. It always had the connection to that land, but it was able to manifest itself and to live in that land, to live as part of history and to forge that identity. And so I think that Judaism and Zionism are inherently linked. Of course, there are Jewish people who do not identify as Zionists, and there are Zionists who do not identify as Jewish. Let's remember, probably there are more Christian Zionists in the world than there are Jewish Zionists in the world, right?
Yeah.
So let's understand all of these definitions, but what does it mean to be a Zionist? To be a Zionist means, and I have to go in a few minutes, gents, but to be a Zionist means to believe and to act out the national liberation of the Jewish people. That's what it means. It does not mean you have to agree with every Israeli policy. It does not mean you have to agree with the Israeli government. It doesn't mean you have to agree on any specific aspect other than making sure that the Jewish people have a right to self-determination in their ancestral homeland and a right to dignity. Like any other peoples.
Yeah. And I think that's something to keep in mind, because I think like so many times when you go into individual policies, you could say you're not a Zionist, but it's a political movement. It's not like a political party, but to keep it like in perspective, it's almost like being Republican doesn't mean that you support every Republican, every shade of Republicanism, and every Republican policy. It means you support the Republican agenda.
Stephen, I want to clarify something.
Stephen,
I want to clarify something. You're only talking about political Zionism. There's labor Zionism. There's cultural Zionism. There's spiritual Zionism. There's religious Zionism.
Right,
there are all different types of Zionism that are not political in nature. And I want to encourage people to think about Zionism not exclusively through that political prism.
Right. Like the focus on Israeli companies and their betterment. I think like economic Zionism is something that's huge, especially like you see after like serving the nation, a lot of companies in Israel give preference to soldiers who have fought, not who have abstained from fighting. And that fighting is something that's regularized in the economy, so it's something that is not necessarily a setback or an obstacle. And I think that would be like, in my opinion, an example of Zionism aside from the political sphere.
Very cool.
Yeah,
I like it.
And then to just finish off right before you go, if you had to give and relay one message to the Jewish youth globally in that 18 to 24 region, or even 14 to 24 region, what would it be?
The future is yours, but that's trite. The present is yours. That's the reality. Older people like saying to younger people, the future is yours. No. The present belongs to you. The present right now belongs to you. And if the present belongs to you, you have a responsibility. And then the responsibility is to be two things that I already described. Number one is be knowledgeable, meaning be educated. You have to know the history. You have to know the story. You have to know the current events. You have to do that because the present is yours and you have to be knowledgeable. And number two is it's a pitch, if you will. Be proud of who you are. Be proud of your identity. Be proud of your history. Embrace it. It's you. It's yours. And there's so many different colors to the rainbow that allows you to express your Judaism. There's so many different ways to do it. Find your way that's meaningful to you. The Jewish people need you and the world needs you. So be informed, be knowledgeable, be competent, be confident.
So live in the present and be confident in your own skin, and know that the skin is a shade of skin. You don't need to be either skinned or skinless.
All shades.
Yeah.
Seize the day. Yeah. What carpe diem.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Noam, if you have any few comments, you have the floor. Just to finish off.
Everyone should make sure to be like Stephen and Oz, take their future into their own hands, and everyone should also make sure to, of course, listen to Unpacking Israeli History and to follow us, Jewish Unpacked, on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, the Unpacked YouTube channel, Today Unpack Big Jewish Ideas. It's all there. Go check it out.
The current. Yeah.
Number one.
All right, everyone, like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, just drop us any questions and we'll ask them in the next interview. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Stephen.
Bye.
Thanks, Oz.
Bye,
Take care,
guys.
guys.